Welcome back to ESPR Boxing's YouTube channel. Delighted, as always, to be joined by Paul and Elliot. We are just a few days away from all the undercard being released for the Matchroom versus Queensberry 5-on-5, which will be on the undercard of Dmitry Bivol versus Artur Beterbiev on June the 1st in Saudi Arabia. There's lots of speculation going around still, gents. Nothing's been leaked at the time that we're speaking about. As we've said, just five weight divisions. Two decided by Eddie Hearn, two decided by Frank Warren, and one decided by Turki Al Sheikh. Really looking forward to seeing it. We're just going to discuss a couple of possible matchups we might see and what both of you think about them. Elliot, going to go to you first. Give us your possible fight that you might like to see on June the 1st.
Will do. Thank you very much, mate, for having me. Looking forward to discussing this. I'm going to take the role, I suppose, of Eddie Hearn here, or Frank Warren, and suggest the light heavyweight division for my fight. And this is a fight that involves two fighters that have come through Artur Beterbiev, both lost, both recently. And it's going to be Callum Smith. Obviously got a super fan on the show here, Paul Kelly, a super fan of Callum Smith still, and Anthony Yarde. I think it'd be a nice fight for me. I know there's obviously been talk and speculation about Yarde fighting Buatsi, but I feel like both of these fighters actually have had kind of similar careers in some respects. Like they've lost to, well, if you take the Lyndon Arthur loss, which has some mitigating circumstances around it, have lost to kind of elite fighters. I suppose you'd say Callum Smith did obviously lose to John Ryder, but on his record it doesn't show that. But they've kind of they've stepped up, they've kind of hit a certain level with a lot of hype, but they've failed at that kind of world championship level. Against Beterbiev, no criticism there, obviously, an all-time great fighter. But I think both of these guys actually need a kind of marquee win actually on their record, especially up at light heavyweight. So for me, that's where the intrigue actually exists here for this fight. And again, obviously both carry power. I think actually stylistically it'd be a fantastic fight. Both obviously, big punches. It's just a question of, we've seen Smith, the way he kind of reacts to people that put pressure on him. And I think that, he's sort of trying to get into sort of hooking contests with various fighters. But I think if he does that with obviously Anthony Yarde, go a certain way. Not necessarily want to make up a prediction here, but I think this one will be an explosive fight. Both guys need it, I think, as a stepping stone to stay relevant in that division, on the top end of that division. And we just want to see those British fights done. We want to see the fights between these guys. We want Buatsi in that mix as well, frankly. And I think it's time now. Anthony Yarde's 32 years old, Callum Smith's 33. It's time they crack on and we start getting that carousel of British light heavyweight fights happening.
Yeah, for sure. I think it would be a really interesting fight to happen if you consider they both faced Beterbiev in the last year or so. You can compare performances. There would be some people that would say that Beterbiev, who was actually winning that fight, that Yarde, who was winning that fight against Beterbiev at the time of the stoppage, compared to Callum Smith, who was kind of pretty fairly dominated throughout that fight. Paul, your thoughts on this fight? Who would be favourite going in, do you think?
Yeah, mate. I think it's a fight that I definitely want to see, and it's fair to say that all British boxing fans, ever since both were on the rise, ever since Callum Smith said that he was moving up to light heavyweight, it's been a fight that's been talked about and discussed, and I think the timing, it makes sense. Obviously both have lost, as you mentioned, both have lost to Beterbiev. But it makes a whole lot of sense that fight. I think it's like, winner can come again and maybe win a world title at light heavyweight, get their shot. Loser, where did they go? There would be quite a lot riding on the fight. And yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it does make a huge lot of sense. And at this moment in time, I would probably still favour Callum Smith, albeit his performance against Beterbiev wasn't as good as Anthony Yarde. I agree with that. But I still think Callum Smith's fundamentally a better and more sound boxer than Anthony Yarde is.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to kind of address the elephant in the room as well here. Anthony Yarde fought recently, as did Buatsi. And after the Yarde fight, they kind of had that not face off kind of get together during the post-fight interview. And it looks like there is a possibility that Anthony Yarde will be fighting Joshua Buatsi next. And obviously Joshua Buatsi is with Boxer. However, I would say two things to this. Is that fight definitely going to happen next? Can that fight be made? A Boxer going to allow Joshua Buatsi to fight on TNT Sports? A Queensberry Frank Warren going to allow Anthony Yarde to fight on Boxer and Sky Sports? I'm not convinced. I also think the amount of money that's being generated by the Saudis for these fights, if I'm Anthony Yarde, there's a good chance you're being offered more money to fight Callum Smith, sorry, in Saudi on June the 1st, than you would be to fight Joshua Buatsi in London. So I do actually think this is a live idea that Elliot's come up with. I think it makes sense. I think both fighters are kind of similar age, early mid 30s, and they're at sort of the stage of their careers now where they want the big fights. I would say especially Anthony Yarde. I think an issue I have with Anthony Yarde's career is not many people can name his top three wins or three of his wins. You can name his losses, but you can't name his wins, and I think that's why he kind of needs these sort of fights. Going to ask for a quick fire prediction, gents, at this stage, if that fight was to happen. Elliot, I'll go back to you. It's obviously all hypothetical speaking now, but if that fight is to happen on June the 1st, who are you leaning towards?
Oh man, I actually think it's really, really tough to call. I agree with Paul actually in some ways. So you look at Callum Smith, obviously the super middleweight run he had, and you go, it's probably better CV wise than you look at Anthony Yarde. But for me, I feel both of them have been hyped to a certain level, but Smith probably more so than Anthony Yarde. But I actually think Anthony Yarde would win. Very, very tough prediction though, to be honest. I'm sort of 55-45 with it. And if Paul's sitting there obviously saying Callum Smith wins, I'm not really going to criticise that because I think it's that close a fight. But I think Anthony Yarde wins. I actually think that Anthony Yarde could stop Callum Smith. I really do. I think if it'll be both of them again, like, throwing hooks essentially. But I just got a feeling that Anthony Yarde will have speed and present a different problem essentially to Callum Smith who's faced before. And I just don't think Callum Smith necessarily at that, when he gets into those sort of fights, doesn't seem to perform when that pressure's on in that way. So I just think his style will again be kind of like shrinking into himself. And I just feel like he's very good at knocking out a certain level of fighter. But I think Anthony Yarde's above that level of fighter. So I'm actually going to go with Yarde KO. But again, if Paul says Callum Smith victory, I'm not really going to criticise that. It's a very, very close fight, and that's why I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I'm actually going to join you here, and that for the reason being, I'm not convinced Callum Smith will be the same fighter now after what happened against Beterbiev. I think it was just one hell of a beatdown. You've not seen Callum Smith. We've seen Callum Smith lose before, but not taken apart like that against the 39 Beterbiev in a fight that some people had gave him a chance of winning. So I would agree with you. Not an easy prediction, but I would go for Yarde as well. Paul, who would win that fight and why?
Yeah, I completely understand the case you're making, and it wouldn't surprise me one bit if Anthony Yarde was doing that. But I still think I'm banking on the fact that yes, he just got beaten and outclassed by Beterbiev, but that he still has quite a lot left in the tank, Callum Smith. So I would edge towards Callum Smith. Method of victory, I'm late stoppage or points. I'd actually probably more maybe go towards a points victory. Even though both are big punchers, I don't know. I think he could outbox Anthony Yarde if he fought that way. But that being said, would that be the tactics going into the fight? I'm not so sure. But yeah, if you had to push me for a prediction, I'd probably say Smith points at this stage.
Fantastic. We'll stick with you, Paul. Give us the fight that you would like to see or you're thinking about ahead of June 1st.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because there's so many, and then you obviously you don't want to be picking fights that you don't want to be picking fights that are really unrealistic or perhaps are like too big of a disparity in levels. But one that kind of jumped out at me is a super middleweight contest, which would have, in my opinion, world title implications, and that is Zack Parker against Diego Pacheco. Pacheco's 20-0, obviously, with 17 KOs. Parker's also got 17 KOs in his 23 victories. Only loss was the Ryder defeat, where he, got that it was a stoppage defeat, I suppose it goes down as. But there's question marks around it with the injury and so to speak. But he's back now, and that's a fight that, yeah, I think it has massive world title implications. I think Pacheco has been outstanding. We've obviously seen him on UK shores when he came over and fought Jack Cullen as well, and I just think like he's a real problem. Still so young as well. He's huge at the weight, massive puncher. Zack Parker's big at the weight as well, also a really big puncher, and I think that's just fireworks, that fight. There was a stage there where people were talking about Zack Parker getting that world title shot, maybe even fighting Canelo, So yeah, he was right up there in the conversation of getting a shot for the world title, and you're looking at Diego Pacheco and you're thinking, yeah, he's a world champion in waiting. So kind of timeline wise and the stages that they're at in their career, I think it's a fight that makes sense for both men. And whoever lost that fight, I don't think it would be the end for them either. I think they would be more than capable of coming again. But yeah, it's a fight that really interests me, mate. And yeah, kind of, I don't know whether it's a curveball or not, but obviously not a British v British fight. We're throwing one of Eddie Hearn's overseas prospects in there. So yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing that one.
Yeah, we'll see. I think obviously, look, you can't help but kind of look at the roster of me Matchroom and Queensberry fighters, and some fights definitely appeal more than others. But look, I think this one would be an intriguing one. Diego Pacheco, I think, is seen as a genuine, what like one of the biggest world prospects in boxing right now. And Zach Parker, I would say, like pre the John Ryder fight, was being touted as someone who could go on to win a world title. Was big things were being spoken about, and kind of it was unfortunate what happened in that fight, and I feel like he's not really got his career back on track yet. I think it's a good shout, Paul. I'm not against that fight. What do you think? What do you think would happen?
I find it really difficult to see past Diego Pacheco, if I'm honest. I think Zach Parker is a very credible fighter, and it would probably, would you say that would be Pacheco's best win? It could maybe be his best win. Probably would be. Pacheco's still on the rise, still very young, and I think that would be a good name for him to get on the resume. Personally, so yeah, I would edge towards Pacheco, and not surprisingly, given his KO percentage and just how biteful a puncher he looks and how good of a finisher he is when he gets his opponents hurt. I think he would probably stop Zach Parker, if I'm honest.
Yeah, and I think with
Yeah.
Pacheco, I think look, as much as he is a massive prospect, you could argue that he is being managed carefully, which is what happens when you're very young and very good. You kind of it takes a while for you to face kind of a genuine top 10, top 15 fighter, because you're in no rush. And I think the fact that his opponent was Jack Cullen when he fought in the UK last year says that, to be honest. Elliot, what are your thoughts on this fight?
Yeah, I like this from Paul. Actually, a bit of an outside sort of suggestion in some ways. I think it's actually tough for me to comment just because, like you said, the kind of abortive sense of what happened with Parker versus Ryder, and like we didn't necessarily. I thought that was a good standout moment for him there, and obviously he got injured and had the fight to come off. So I still feel like we don't really know necessarily where Parker's level is. I mean, he had a good stoppage victory over Morrison, wasn't it? But it went distance with Eubank. But then he also lost to Bentley, so it's like he's kind of hard to necessarily calibrate where he is at that level. I think, to be honest with you, I think if I have to be perfectly honest and make a sort of prediction, well, not make a prediction, but kind of see what I think is going to happen, I think Pacheco will beat him, frankly. I think, you look at him, he stopped that, was it Caceres, wasn't it, last time out? He went the distance with Belanga. He absolutely battered Cullen as well. So for me, I just think for me, the key thing here is the size that Paul mentioned. Obviously he's young, he's 22, but 6'4" with 79-inch reach compared to what Parker will be 6 foot with a 74. So he's got the size and everything on his as an advantage as well. So I actually think I'm oddly going against maybe what Paul was saying. I think maybe it could actually go down to points, but I just still think that Jago would win, frankly. And either wide points or maybe late stoppage, somewhere sort of 9-12. But I still back him to win, frankly.
Yeah, and again, similar to Zach, Zach Parker's not he's not quite as old as Anthony Yarde or Callum Smith, but the way his career has gone, surely he just kind of wants the biggest fights possible this year. Not a young fighter anymore. He's obviously had a frustrating couple of years with the way that Ryder fight ended and being inactive since then. So we'll see. I think it's a possibility, and I'm sure we could all name kind of 7 or 8 fights that we want to see. Whether we will see them, whether this 5-on-5 tournament will be a bit of an anticlimax, we'll have to see. All will be revealed apparently on the Joshua and Ngannou fight week, so only a week or so away from that now, gents. And then yeah, we will look forward to June the 1st, which obviously gives us a massive fight in Dimitri Bivol versus Artur Beterbiev, but there'll be plenty to keep us entertained on the undercard in the meantime. Gents, thank you for joining me. Thank you for the suggestions. Hopefully Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren are watching and they'll take notes. But yeah, maybe not. In the meantime, thank you for your time, and I'll speak to both of you again soon.